Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Myra Chen, and I am your host for today's eLotus webinar. eLotus is your leading provider of continuing education for acupuncturists, where you can find over 3,000 hours of TCM information and 200 plus experienced speakers. Today's webinar is sponsored by Evergreen Herbs, and we have 3 groups joining us. The first group is our WIF group, who use the code to get free access to today's webinar. The video replay and CEUs are not available for you, but you can upgrade to our second paid group. Paid group attendees will be able to enjoy today's webinar, watch it as many times as they want for the next month, and earn CEUs. Finally, if you want to upgrade to ultimate and full access, you can join our third group, which is our Gold Pass members. I'll go into more detail later today, but our Gold Pass members have free access to live webinars and distance learning courses for their duration of their membership. Today's webinar is Zhang Zhong Jing Medicine, Fuzi Formulas, presented by Ivan Zavala. Before we begin, let's do a little housekeeping. Today's webinar will be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time, and we will have one break. If you have not already, please get your copy of the lecture notes from the blue course access page in your account. If you would like to join the chat, please do the following right now. Set your chat preference to everyone so that everyone can see what you're typing. You'll have to do this manually because the default setting allows only the speaker and the staff to see what you're writing. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. Our speaker will answer the questions as time allows. The quiz and the video replay for paid and Gold Pass members will be both available tomorrow, and you will receive an email notification when they are. Our speaker today is Ivan Zavala, who is the founder of Nirvana Acupuncture and specializes in autoimmune diseases and internal medicine. His interests as a Chinese medicine practitioner and professor are in treating severe and complex disease with direct insight and guidance from the Chinese medical classics. Ivan is passionate about communicating with other professionals about important medical concepts that underpin various historical eras of Chinese medicine. He has taught other herbal formula webinars with us, so if you would like to learn more from Ivan, please find his courses online now at elotus.org. Now, let's begin today's class and welcome Ivan Zavala. Okay, Ivan, please take over now and share your PowerPoint.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for eLotus for hosting me again, and it's always a pleasure to be here, as always. Everybody can hear me well? Okay. And we're going to have our break too, around an hour and 15, and that'll be for like 10 minutes or so, okay? With that said, let us begin. Oh, and happy holidays, everybody. Whatever you celebrate, wherever you're from, I wish you a happy, restful holidays. A little rest from patience, right? Anyways, let us continue. So, as we know, we're studying foods, formulas, but primarily, sorry, what's happening? Before the foods formulas, we're going to study foods unto itself, because you cannot use foods formulas if you have an aversion to the main prescription, to the main herb. So we will dissect foods and we will try to get some knowledge of foods. And then with that knowledge of foods, then we can begin to have a comfort with using foods slowly, because I never would recommend using foods at ways you're uncomfortable with if you're not experienced with it, right? And I'll talk about that a bit more. But using any toxic herb in Chinese medicine, and I use quite a bit of them, right? And there's a recent book translated by an academic, basically called Poisonous Plants or something like that. It's a free source at one point he put it on. And there he talks about the history of toxic plants in China. And it's quite an interesting read. I mean, I haven't read it all, but I've kind of glimpsed through it. And it's quite an interesting read because you get to see the historical premises, the historical usages and utilization of these toxic medicinals. And from a clinical standpoint, these toxic plants sometimes improve results quite rapidly because of the potency that they offer, right? From a classical perspective, a lot of these poisonous plants, whether they be like the bugs, whether they be the toxic plants, they are from the shen Jing, right, which is the oldest materia medica that we have, right? There were probably other ones, but that's the one we have. That's the oldest. You know, the shen Jing, for those that are aware, categorizes the medicinals into three types of categories: the upper grade, the middle grade, and the lower grade. All right, the upper grade are said to basically nurture kind of your Ming, your destiny, your life, right? And the middle grades, they kind of are in between. They nourish I forgot what they say, they nourish a specific aspect. But the lower grade herbs, those lower grade herbs treat Bing, they treat disease, they treat your essence, they treat your body, right? They're the ones that are necessary if you have a severe kind of illness. And Fuzi is what we call the sage of these lower grade herbs. So yes. Yeah, that book, Healing with Poisons, Potent Medicines in Medieval China. Oops. So let us begin. Let's begin to look at Fuzi from kind of a standpoint of, from a standpoint of just kind of Western research from a botanical standpoint. So Fuzi or has a chemical belongs to the Aconitum species in the, how will you say this, the Ranunculacea family or whatever. While there are various species depending on the region, the standardized focus in Chinese medicine is Aconitum carmichaelis devix, or how you say that, and Aconitum kuznetsovii. However, many other species have likely been used, right? For example, in Yunnan province, there are 8 types alone of Fuzi, right? And of course, around the world, there's all types of different Fuzi species. Here in the America, there's quite a few of them, but they're not the same as the ones from China, right? Now, it's interesting to know that, well, Fuzi is a poison, like, right, called wolf's bane. And historically, people have been poisoned by it. You know, there's a lot of cool stories about Fuzi being used as a poison. Most cultures do have medicinal usages for it. For example, I learned from an Indian colleague that Fuzi there is used, aconite, because Indians actually, in Ayurvedic medicine, especially Siddhi medicine, they use quite a number of toxic medicinals, like heavy metals still, right? I'm not recommending that. But they use Fuzi and they basically, you know, detoxify the plant, and I think they say cow urine or something, and to make it safe or whatever. I don't know how that is utilized or what's the process of that. But you know, you know, in Indian culture, obviously cow is a sacred object or a sacred devotional being, and so its secretions can help detoxify poisons, right? So they use that, and I don't know, they use it for, in a certain way, a similar way the Chinese medicine uses it. Although Fuzi in Chinese medicine has more of an importance, and we use it more for people that are like vanquished yang qi. They use it for all types of things that are similar, like paralysis, hemiplegia, numbness, right? So there's always going to be some semblance of similarity in all cultures, because it's easy to observe when you give a medicinal, it has certain effects that are similar, even if the species is different. Similar chemical property. The medicinal properties largely come from the alkaloids, which can be neurotoxins. So we aware of foods, and I don't want to teach foods toxic, okay? And once you understand that it's toxic, then you can use it with so there are three types of aconite in Chinese medicine. Primarily, there's Fuzi, Wutuo, and Tianshong, right? Tianshong. The main one used is the Aconite Lateris radix preparata, i.e. the prepared form of the appendage of the aconite plant. The primary plant of though is Wutuo, right? What I mean is that's the actual kind of whole tuber of Fuzi, and the lateral appendage of the plant is the Fuzi. Hence why Wutuo is kind of seen as the mother and Fuzi as the child, right? And here's a picture of kind of Wutuo in the middle and kind of the whole tuber, and then you see kind of the appendage aspect of Fuzi, right? So it's kind of like yeah, so so yeah, and Fuzi is kind of like I mean kind of mnemonic to kind of read this. The Si in Fuzi, I mean it means appendage, but the Si also is kind of like it has symbolic meanings in kind of you know, in folklore of Chinese medicine, maybe in the academic not so much, but in the folklore of Chinese, the Si, I mean, has many meanings. But the Si is kind of like a child, right? So it's kind of like it's the offspring of the Wutuo, right? So yes. And so here's just like once the medicine is cultivated and prepared and processed, here are just different forms of that you might see the foods. There's Tianshong. Tianshong, if I'm correct, I believe Tianshong is basically Wutuo that is aged at a certain point, right? It's just like 5 years old Wutuo or something like that. But I've never used Tianshong because I've never seen it be sold here at least, so it's hard to get Tianshong. But maybe one of you has a resource. And of course, all these medicines are basically processed to make them less toxic. For example, all this is the Tianshong, right? Tianshong. And there's a prescription in the Jingui Yalue called Tianshong San, in I think chapter 5 of the Jingui Yalue, the chapter on blood bee, and Shulao Shuibi, Shulao Pian, right? The chapter on blood obstruction and vacuity taxation. So here, and the prescription is Tianshong San, right? Tianshong San, and it's always contrasted to Guizhi Jialonggu Mulitang. They're kind of like pairs of treating the same pattern in a different way. But here, Tianshong, we see it in different ways. So it can be, this is kind of like the standard process one. And then here's the raw Sheng Tianshong, right? The raw Tianshong. And here is Pao Tianshong, kind of blast fried Tianshong. But again, it's hard to find that, right? And here, the bottom one is the Fuzi. Here we have salted Fuzi. Here we have, and of course, we salt it. Anytime we salt the medicinal in Chinese medicine, we're basically, and I mean, salty, as we know from a theoretical standpoint, enters the kidney level, right? Enters the water layer. So in a certain way, it kind of helps nourish the kidney more, makes the medicinal more supplementing or tonifying for the associated organ, right? And there's sheng foods. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using sheng foods, although you could sort of get it if you know where to look. And I have some myself, but I don't recommend using it for most because it's highly toxic. Although there are some doctors who use it, to be honest, especially those who train under the famous physician that we're going to look at, Ni Haisha. Ni Haisha used it. He practiced, his Taiwanese doctor, who practiced in Florida, who specialized in all types of diseases, but especially treating and kind of curing cancers. And he was a big advocate of using raw foods. Again, I would not recommend this. I'm just making you aware of it, okay? And some of his students, like Andy Lee from California, still use raw foods. But again, I don't recommend most people using it. So I'm just informing you that some people do use it in a safe way because they know they have experience with using it raw. And when I mean raw, I don't mean just the raw herb in cooking it. I mean without even being processed at all, because foods are usually processed in some way, even with the raw herb that we get. Then we have pao foods, and of course that's blast or pao fu pian. That's also, pian means like a slice or a piece, right? So these are sliced in pieces, and you'll see the sheng foods and even the salted foods, I think yin foods is more of bigger pieces, right? So that idea. In addition, two different cuts of foods. In addition to other forms of foods, there's different ways to process foods. Besides zhi foods, there's salted foods, there's pao foods, and additionally, there's also hei foods and bai foods. And of course, bai fu pian and hei foods, which actually Heiner Fruhav sells the different types of hei foods and bai foods. Hei foods means black foods, bai foods means white foods, right? And so the salted foods, the zhi foods, the pao foods, the hei foods, the bai foods, all these foods do something a little bit different, okay? But to be honest, I don't use salted foods because I don't really get that. So, I mean, I will have to prepare myself, and I don't know, I just don't do it. I use a lot of pao foods, hei foods, hei fu pian, and zhi foods. That's what I primarily use in clinic myself. But Heiner will say bai fu pian, and even Chinese sources will say bai fu pian is just to white foods, it's just to treat more expel wind, for headaches, and to raise yang qi. So it's almost like more to treat something external, okay? Hei fu pian, black foods, is used to more rescue yang, right? Like hui zhou yang, right? To rescue and bring back yang. Pao foods, now that's better to warm the spleen. Anything pao in Chinese medicine, roasted, usually makes the medicine a little bit more, more gentle, right? More moderate in nature. So when that has an effect more on the middle jiao, okay? And that's going to be helpful for kind of yang deficiency, spleen yang, TCM spleen yang deficiency. With diarrhea, right? Splenic kidney yang deficiency. With diarrhea, that diarrhea often happens in the morning. What did they call, like, the cockroach diarrhea, right? That's a sign of the yang deficiency. But of course, you could have the diarrhea from a clinical standpoint at any time of day. but it usually worsens a little bit at night, because at night the yin grows, right? The night is known as Tai-yin time, because Tai-yin is the time of great yin, right? At night, people's yin, the yin of nature increases, so that means the yin in the body increases, right? So yes, somebody's now, as I said, Hey Foods or Hey Food Pian is not the same as Jiv Foods. They are both foods but prepared distinctly. Basically, I don't have the time to translate this. The way that foods is processed, and I'm just giving you an overall, a simplistic overarching emphasis or whatever, because my emphasis is not on the processing. You could look that up. My emphasis is on the clinical standpoint, and we already have lots of slides, so I'm not trying to go too much on the processing. But basically, to give an overview, the foods, first you remove the wugun, or the mugun, the mother root, which is the wutuo. Okay, so first you remove the mother, so you kind of have to separate the wutuo first, and then you kind of have to basically wash it or brine it or something, and they use different substances to kind of wash the root and stuff like that. They use things, they traditionally, I think they kind of brine it or wash it or soak it over and over in some type of salty brine or something, right? Or some type of yeah, some type of salty brine or something. But now the problem is, now they skip that process for faster processing, and Heiner goes goes a lot into this, the modern problems with foods up. But basically now they use some type of alkali, or I don't know what type, what it's made of, honestly. But when they use the alkali, it kind of makes the foods a little bit more, I don't know if it basically creates more side effects for the foods, because it's not prepared traditionally like they do in Sichuan and stuff like that. So when that happens, the foods begins to have more side effects. It usually becomes more hot and toxic. So people, when they start using foods, the medicinal begins to give you more side effects. So often like liver fire and stuff like that. Not toxic that is going to basically harm you, but it just doesn't do what you think foods is going to do. Additionally, foods should be, what isn't done traditionally either, is they basically pick it at the wrong time of year. So foods are supposed to be picked in the summer, but it's not, right? It's supposed to be harvested in the summer. And that's just part of the Daudi, or the Daudi, I believe, the way of cultivating plants at a specific region, and within that they have ways to harvest it, when to harvest it, at what time, at what equinox, and then at that time when to plant it, when to harvest it. And that has, in Chinese medicine, and even from a Western standpoint, an effect on the different chemicals found in the plant when at the time of harvest. So it does have an effect, but from a Chinese medicine standpoint, we're not necessarily worried about the chemicals inside the plant. We're more necessarily focused on the flavor and nature of the plant. And the nature changes because you have to understand that plants get hit by the sun at different times of the year, and that sun basically makes the plant goes obviously from to different photosynthesis or whatever, makes the plant grow at different stages, and at the different stages is going to have different chemical constituents. So foods are supposed to be harvested, and then I think it's supposed to be grown in the summer. That's yin and yang, right? So and that's kind of to harness winter and summer, heart and kidney. That's Xiao. These are just other examples of foods, and this is just purely food. I mean, I have Sheng Foods, but I actually don't have it like this. I have Sheng Foods Pian. So actually, when I got raw foods, they still slice it in pian, in slices, right? So yeah. Here we see that there is this little horn coming out of it, this jiao, out of this raw foods, of this little horn. And here we see this concavity out of the foods, of this indentation, right? So that's part of the topography of the plant. Here we have the salty foods. You see that it's often not cut. And then we start to see the pian, right? See, here we see the slices of black foods and white foods. And actually, like I've seen Spring Wind, the foods that they sell is heifu pian often, heifu pian. And this is how it looks like. It has this like this black tint around it, right? So that's high foods.